My name is Hannah Cole, and on the night everything shifted, I was halfway into my coat, my keys already in my hand, ready to drive to my sister's house for dinner. It was supposed to be simple, familiar, the kind of Sunday evening that tied the two of us together after months of barely speaking. Megan had insisted all week, sending photos of a roast chicken in the oven, promising it would be just like old times. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But then my phone buzzed, 3 missed calls from my attorney, Daniel Brooks, and a single message glowing on the screen as if it were burning through the glass. Hannah, don't go to Megan's house tonight. Call me the moment you see this. I'm serious. For a second, I froze in the doorway. The cold air from outside swept in behind me, raising a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Daniel wasn't the type to panic. If he said something was wrong, something was wrong. I called him back immediately, my fingers trembling more than I wanted to admit. He picked up before the first ring even finished. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice clipped direct. "By the door," I said. "I was just leaving." "Lock it. Right now." He waited, listening for the click. "Good. I'm driving to you. There's something you need to see. And it's about your sister." My heart thudded against my ribs. Megan and I had grown apart. Sure, but this tone, this urgency, felt like stepping toward the edge of something I hadn't realized was broken. "Daniel," I whispered, "what's going on?" He hesitated, and that scared me more than anything. "Hannah, whatever you thought tonight was going to be, it isn't. Megan's been planning something, and it involves everything your parents left you." The air around me tightened, pressing into my lungs. That was the moment I knew this wasn't a family dinner. It was a warning. Daniel arrived at my house 20 minutes later, his car still running in the driveway as if he couldn't spare a second. When I opened the door, he stepped in without small talk, gripping a folder so tightly the edges had curled. "We should sit down," he said. We went to the kitchen, the same place Megan and I used to drink coffee after our parents' funerals, promising we'd take care of each other. I hadn't realized how fragile that promise was. Daniel set the folder on the table. "Everything here was filed with the probate court last week. Megan and Jason have petitioned for guardianship over you." For a moment, the words didn't register. Guardianship was for people who couldn't manage their own lives, people slipping into confusion or memory loss. "I'm not..." The words stuck in my throat. Daniel pushed a packet toward me. "They're claiming cognitive decline, forgetfulness, disorientation, trouble handling finances." He pointed to one page. "Your doctor noted insomnia and stress." And here he tapped another. "A neighbor says she found you standing outside late at night looking confused." "I wasn't confused," I whispered. "I just couldn't sleep." "I know," Daniel said, "but they're building a very careful case." He turned his laptop toward me. A real estate appraisal filled the screen. "The lake cabin your parents left you? It's nearly doubled in value. Close to $4 million. The room tilted slightly. "That's why Megan's doing this," Daniel said. "If they get guardianship, they control everything. Your accounts, your business decisions, the cabin. All of it." My hands tightened on the edge of the table. "She invited me to dinner," I murmured. Daniel nodded. "Because she thinks you don't know. And as long as she believes that, you're safer than you realize." His words settled over me like a shadow, and something inside me shifted, not just fear, but the first spark of a quiet, growing resolve. The next morning, my house felt different, as if the walls were listening. I sat at the kitchen table with a blank notebook. Daniel had told me to document everything, tasks, conversations, decisions, so I wouldn't just remember my life. I could prove it. I wrote down the time, the weather, my breakfast. It felt silly at first, like performing for someone unseen. But beneath the awkwardness was anger, steady and warm. If Megan wanted to twist tiny moments into evidence, I would turn my entire life into a record she couldn't distort. By midday, Daniel called. "I got you in with Dr. Alicia Park. Independent psychiatric evaluation. She's excellent." At her office, the building smelled faintly of eucalyptus calm, in a way I wasn't. Dr. Park greeted me with a steady, assessing gaze. She didn't treat me like someone fragile, just someone seeking clarity. She led me through memory tests, logic puzzles, story recall. When she asked me to interpret a proverb, the explanation came easily. I wasn't just answering her, I was pushing back against every lie Megan had planted. After an hour, she closed her notebook. "You're sharp," she said. "Focused, oriented, and cognitively intact. Whatever stress you're under hasn't touched your mental capacity." I loosened something tight in my chest. Driving home that evening, I found a voicemail from Megan. Her voice was warm, syrupy. "Hey, Han. I feel awful about last weekend. Why don't you come by Sunday? I'm making lasagna. We can look at the estate papers together." Estate papers, something she'd never cared about before. I stood in the driveway listening again to her sweetness, and something cold slid down my spine. She was performing. And now, for the first time, I could hear the script. By Sunday evening, I had rehearsed every possible version of the dinner in my mind. I wasn't going to cancel. Daniel told me it was better to observe Megan up close to see how far she was willing to go. Still, as I stood on her porch, with a pan of store-bought brownies in my hands, something she'd teased me about in better years, I could feel my pulse tapping against my ribs. Megan opened the door wearing an apron and a smile polished enough to reflect light. "There you are," she said, pulling me inside before I could answer. The house smelled like garlic and basil, warm and inviting, the kind of scent that used to mean comfort. Tonight it felt staged. Jason was in the kitchen plating lasagna. He looked up with an expression so friendly it bordered on theatrical. "Hannah, good to see you," he said, as if he hadn't just filed paperwork to take over my life. We sat down at the dining table. I noticed immediately that one of the decorative wall frames had been angled, strangely pointing directly at my chair. A small lens glinted behind the glass, subtle but visible to someone who wasn't supposed to be losing awareness. I kept my face still. Dinner began with harmless questions: how my work was going, whether I'd been sleeping better. But the rhythm shifted quickly. Megan leaned in, her voice full of gentle concern. "You've seemed overwhelmed lately, like when you forgot the route to our old cabin last month." "I didn't forget," I said softly. "There was construction. They rerouted the road." "Oh, right," she replied too quickly. "I must have mixed it up." Jason chimed in, mentioning how he once found me confused at the farmer's market staring at a display of peaches. I remembered that day perfectly. I wasn't confused, I was upset after a stressful client call. But they weren't here for the truth. They were here to build a story. Halfway through dinner, Zoe slipped into the room, her hair damp from a shower. She muttered hello, but her eyes flicked between her parents and me with something guarded, almost wary. When the plates were cleared, Megan suggested we take a look at the estate documents. The casual tone didn't match the tightness around her mouth. I smiled, letting the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle her. "Maybe another time," I said. "Tonight I just want to enjoy dinner." Her expression froze, a hairline crack in the performance. As I walked to my car later, the cold air felt cleaner than the house I'd just left. And for the first time, I knew exactly what Megan was doing. She wasn't asking for dinner. She was building a case. 3 nights after that dinner, a storm rolled over Denver, clouds pressed low like a warning. I was writing in my logbook when a frantic knock cut through the quiet. For a second, I thought it was the wind, until a trembling voice called out, "Hannah, please, it's me." Zoe stood on my doorstep, soaked, clutching her backpack like armor. Her breaths came in sharp, frightened bursts. "Can I come in?" she whispered. I pulled her inside, wrapped her in a blanket, sat her by the heater. She shook, not just from the cold. For a long moment, she stared at her hands, twisting the blanket's edge. "Zoe, what happened?" I asked. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I know what my parents are doing, and you need to hear something." She pulled an old tablet from her backpack, the one Jason used for calls. The screen was cracked, but still worked. "I wasn't snooping," she said quickly. "They were arguing in the kitchen. Dad left this out. I heard them talking about you, about getting control of your accounts. And when he walked away, I hit record." Before I could answer, she pressed play. Megan's voice filled the room, cold and controlled. "Once the court gives us guardianship, we'll list the cabin first. The equity alone covers most of the debt." Jason followed, quieter, crueler. "She won't fight it. She never does. Once everything's transferred, we're fine." Then Megan, again sharp enough to cut. "She doesn't use what she has." "Jason, she doesn't deserve any of it." Zoe stopped, the recording hands trembling. "I didn't want to believe it. But they're not helping you. They're taking everything." I leaned back as the room tilted, my body struggling to absorb the betrayal. "You did the right thing," I said softly. But inside, something darker settled. Not fear, understanding. Megan hadn't just crossed a line, she'd erased it. The courthouse in Jefferson County always looked a little too clean, like truth couldn't possibly survive inside it. That morning, the sky hung low and gray, and for a moment, I wondered if Megan felt even an ounce of the weight pressing on my chest. Daniel walked beside me, steady and unhurried, his briefcase swinging lightly, as if the evidence inside didn't have the power to rewrite our entire family. Inside the courtroom was small, paneled with dark wood, the air still enough to taste. Megan and Jason were already seated at their table. Megan wore a fitted navy blazer, her hair perfect, her expression a portrait of concerned sisterhood. Jason sat stiffly beside her, jaw clenched, eyes darting everywhere but toward me. When Judge Eleanor Miles entered, everyone rose. She had the calm authority of someone who'd sifted through too many family betrayals to be impressed by theatrics. The petitioner's attorney started first, speaking with the polished tone of a man who practiced sincerity in the mirror. He talked about my recent cognitive issues, how Megan had stepped in out of love, how their only intention was my safety. Photos of me looking tired, notes about my insomnia, and the neighbor's affidavit were all laid out like pieces of a puzzle someone had forced into the wrong shape. I listened without flinching. Every accusation felt distant now, almost hollow, like an echo of a version of me Megan needed to exist. When it was our turn, Daniel stood with a calm that filled the room. He handed Judge Miles the psychiatric evaluation first. Dr. Park's assessment confirms Ms. Cole shows no signs of cognitive impairment or diminished capacity, he said. In fact, she performed well above average. Megan shifted in her seat. Then Daniel presented the financial documents, mortgage arrears, credit card debt. Jason's failed business. A flush crept up Megan's neck. Your Honor, Daniel continued, these filings are not an act of protection. They're an act of desperation. The tension in the room thickened. Finally, Daniel nodded at me. I reached into my folder and pulled out the tablet Zoe had given me, the recording saved on a small drive. My hands didn't shake as I passed it to the clerk. The judge pressed play. Megan's voice spilled into the silent room. Cold, confident, calculating. Jason's voice followed, layering greed on top of contempt. Every word cut through the courtroom like glass. When it ended, no one breathed. Judge Miles leaned forward slowly. Mrs. Reed, she said, her voice sharp as steel, would you like to explain why you're planning to sell your sister's property before she has even been declared incompetent? Megan opened her mouth, but nothing came out, not even a lie. The judge's eyes hardened, and in that moment I knew the ground had finally shifted, not beneath me, but beneath them. Judge Miles paused before speaking. Her gaze locked on Megan with cutting precision. The courtroom felt suspended, everyone waiting. This petition, she said slowly, is not an attempt to protect a vulnerable family member. It is a calculated effort to seize her assets. She tapped the paperwork. The recording makes that unmistakably clear. Megan's shoulders collapsed. Jason stared down, his knuckles white. They no longer looked confident, only exposed. The petition for guardianship is denied. Judge Miles continued, dismissed with prejudice. Mrs. Reed and Mr. Reed are prohibited from contacting Ms. Cole or approaching her home for 24 months. A beat. This will also be referred to the district attorney for review of potential fraud and misuse of the guardianship system. The gavel struck once, echoing through the room. I exhaled, not in triumph, but in release. Months of fear unspooled all at once. Daniel squeezed my shoulder as people filed out. Reporters whispered about exploitation and family greed. Behind me, a soft voice called my name. Zoe stood by the benches, eyes red but resolute. She walked toward me carefully, like she still expected her parents to pull her back. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know it would go this far. I hugged her before she finished. She trembled, torn between guilt and relief. You were brave, I murmured. You told the truth. Across the room, Megan watched her daughter with a hollow, fractured expression. Something desperate flickered in her eyes, but Zoe didn't look back. Outside, the cold air smelled of wet pavement and pine. Zoe stayed close beside me. Daniel moved ahead, already thinking about legal protections, but my attention stayed on the girl at my side. Everything Megan tried to take my autonomy, my home, my future, I still had. What she lost was far greater. Her daughter chose the truth. Winter faded slowly that year, as if the cold didn't want to loosen its grip on the city. But inside my house, warmth returned long before the snow melted. Zoe stayed with me for a few nights, then a few weeks, until it became clear she wasn't just visiting. She was rebuilding something: trust, stability, maybe even a sense of safety she hadn't realized she'd lost. Our days found a quiet rhythm. I worked in my studio while she studied at the dining table, her headphones tangled in her hair. Evenings were softer, cooking together, rewatching old movies, leaving the kitchen lights on later than necessary, just to avoid the silence that used to settle there. The house grew full in a way it hadn't been in years. One Saturday we drove up to the lake cabin. Snow still clung to the ground, sparkling in patches under the early spring sun. Zoe stepped out of the car and breathed in the cold mountain air with a kind of reverence. It's beautiful, she said. I nodded, feeling the familiar ache of memory. Your grandparents loved it here. They said the lake always made people honest. For a while we walked the shoreline without speaking. The water was calm, a sheet of light moving gently with the breeze. Eventually, Zoe asked the question she had been circling for weeks. Do you think you'll ever forgive her? My mom? I took my time answering. Forgiveness isn't about saying what happened didn't matter. It's deciding not to let it run your life anymore. I let the words sink in before I added, but forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in. Those are two different doors. Zoe looked out at the water, her breath forming faint clouds. I miss who she used to be, she said. So do I admitted. But sometimes the person we remember is just a version we held on to because it hurt too much to let go. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, the lake glimmered in a pale gold that felt like a promise. Not of forgetting, but of moving forward. Megan had tried to take my home, my name, my choices. In the end, what she lost was the only thing she couldn't rebuild. And what I gained, quiet strength, clarity, and the family I chose, was something she could never take from me.